Hi, wonderful people. I'm Leah Rapaner. As a sociologist, University of Melbourne professor, founder of the Gender Equity Initiative, director of the Future of Work Lab, woman, wife, and mother, I've made it my life's mission to take down every ridiculous gender myth out there. Together, we'll deep dive into the research to get to the bottom of all these misperceptions that are holding all of us back. Don't worry, I've studied these types of questions for decades, and after publishing countless articles exactly on these topics, I know when they are nonsense or real truths. And I'm going to help you learn that too. So here we go. Let's do it. This is Misperceived. We know you love the content, and so we're here to give you more. Just wanted to let you know, we've got some bonus episodes coming. These are interviews all about the mental load with experts in the field. And I don't just mean me, although of course I'm in there too, but we're working with New America and Haley Swenson there. We have Avni Patel Thompson, Verity Tuck, Eve Rodsky, Mira Gunawanza, and we're talking to you all about the mental load. What is it? How do you hold it? How can you solve it? Can tech help you? And what does it look like for women with intersectional identities? So have an eye out. The episodes are coming, and yeah, you're going to fall in love with them, obviously. Now let's get into today's topic. On today's episode of Misperceived, we're going to unpack the idea, is it in fact a misperception that being single is more expensive? For those of you who are single out there, man, I know it's rough. Like, people are turning away from the dating apps at higher rates than ever before. The cost of living is going up, and so it's more expensive for everybody to be out there. But is there something unique about being single? I mean, is this just one more example of bad news? Well, I'm going to walk you through some studies looking at, does it in fact benefit people by being in a union, right? And how does it? Now, this one will be quick, sweet, and short, but I hope by the end you have some insight into not only what it means to be single at the start of a relationship, but also what it might mean to be single at the end. And what you need to be thinking about in case you are in a marriage and you're worried that your marriage is going to end at some point. So there's a little bit in there for everybody. How do we be a little better prepared for anything that life throws at us? I'm going to talk to you about this article from Lawrence Turchin, Bram de Rock, Kuspu Sarana, and Frederick Vermeulen. And these are economists. They published this article, Marital Matching, Economies of Scale, and Intra-Household Allocations. And the reason I'm bringing you an article from economists is because economists think about these kind of questions. They think about rational allocation of resources. They think about economies of scale. They think about, where does money go? When it comes into the household, how does it get allocated? What do people do? And what does it look like for their long-term well-being or economic prosperity? As sociologists, we often study the same things, but economists do it a little bit different. They think more about rationality. How do we allocate our money? And this article, they're thinking about this. They're asking, what happens if you're like a collective household? Your individuals coming together, married in a household, and then what happens when you're single? And what does that mean for your well-being and your poverty rates and your experiences of cost? So I'm going to start by talking to you about this idea of, there's an assumption that, when we come together in our marital households, we're a bunch of individuals with very different preferences. We might want different things. But when we come together into the household, we're making decisions for the collective good. I might want, a day at the movies, but if my kid wants something different, we come together to make sure that we're efficient and the household preferences change. We're coming in for the group. They also talk about the fact that, hey, there's this kind of idea where we have public goods that we want to do or private goods that are consumed within the household. And this other idea that when we come together in families and marital unions within the household, maybe with kids or maybe not, in this sample they do look at the kids, that we benefit from this thing called economies of scale. The idea of economies of scale is like this economic concept that comes from way back. And it's basically like, if you have people coming together, they can use the one thing. Like if I have a microwave and we all come into my house and we all use the microwave, that microwave becomes less expensive cost per use. But if you don't come together into my household, it means you have to buy your own microwave and I have to buy my own microwave. I don't know why I'm like obsessed with microwaves right now, but fill in the blank of something else you want to put in. And all of a sudden, like the cost per use for that microwave goes up because all of a sudden you have to buy it and I have to buy it. even if we just use it the same amount of time. So this economies of scale is this idea that when we come together in groups and share resources, the resources become cheaper per use because more people are using the same thing. And that thing, therefore, for the cost we paid, becomes less. And the idea is that basically married people, when you partner up, or it could be marriage, or it could be when you live with someone, that all of a sudden the economies of scale go down. You're paying rent for a place, but now two people are paying for that rent, as opposed to me being a single person owning a house. All of a sudden I'm paying the rent or whatever for one house. And so I'm going to be kind of quick on this one because they're asking this question of like, what happens in terms of economies of scale, in terms of resources and preferences and people coming into this household when they're married? Does that lead to better economic outcomes as a result? Like, does that actually help? And what they do is they take this data from the 2013 panel study of income dynamics. It's this big nationally representative sample of U.S. families. They have over 18,000 individuals living in 5,000 families. And it's basically this really valuable data set that shows us how people are working, whether they have money, whether they have wealth, what's their health, what's all of their socio-demographic characteristics. Are they married? Are they, do they have higher educations? And they're trying to piece through how when they come together in marriage, whether you match well with someone else, what happens to the resources. They're trying to get a handle on what are the economies of scale for people who come together? How do my preferences impact that? Does it matter who I marry? What happens to your resources, my resources, and our spending? And what is kind of the outcome on that? And what I want you to learn from this, because, economists do a lot of modeling and they talk a lot about variables and then they include things and they don't. It's very robust. But what they find is that when you're in this marital union and you're bringing together all your resources, you benefit from reduced economies of scale and your chance of ending up in poverty are less. But when you actually leave this household, if you break up, if all of a sudden you become a single person, then you lose these economies of scale. You lose the fact that you are now relying on each other's incomes to come together to make things cheaper. And it leads to a higher risk of poverty. And what they find is this is particularly true for women, that if women lose that economy of scale, if they lose that ability to come together and share resources, that their risks of poverty go up significantly. And they find that, the risks of poverty for them are something between 11 and 25% once they lose that ability to share resources equally. This is critical, right? Economy of scales are really, really important. And it helps to explain, part of the reason why women might lose, this has been shown for decades too. I mean, there's sociological research that shows this too, right? That one of the biggest risks for women to enter poverty is divorce, in part because they give up their earnings in the within the marriage market, right? Like women enter into these households, they have economies of scale. If women step out of employment to help with the kids or to take care of the house, that it's very difficult upon divorce or the dissolution of their relationship to step back into the labor market and make as much money as they made or they could make if they didn't have that career gap. And so I guess what I want you to think about in this is like, we are all working through economies of scale. It's one of the reasons why things can be really expensive when you're living alone, when you're a single person, because you are absorbing all of that cost. It's why people might have roommates that move in. But there's something very important that happens within heterosexual unions and marriage, whereby women benefit from economies of scale, but many of them, not all, many of them lose their labor market ability. They lose their skills if they step out of employment to care for the kids and then try to step back in after divorce. It's very hard on a labor market to trade your acute knowledge of your family into a higher paying job. And so there's these really critical pivot points whereby we make decisions that are economically rational, but can have very important long-term consequences for your rates of poverty, for your experiences, if things don't go the way we expect. So, is it in fact more expensive to be single? Absolutely. You don't benefit from economies of scale. Everything you buy is coming for you alone, and you can't share that cost. This is important for women to be aware of as they're moving through, their single life into their marriage, right? When you move into marriage, yes, you get the benefit of economies of scale, but if something goes wrong in that marriage, you are back to being that single person. And I want you to think about, how can I afford those costs? How could I? Do I have high enough earnings? Do I have high enough income? What will that look like? Because I worry a lot about that moment being a really critical pivot point for women to enter into poverty. They've made all these beautiful decisions for the family, to give, to love, to connect, to be present for the children, to make sure your husband's doing well, to make sure he's his best at work. These are all noble and valuable things. Unfortunately, we don't live in a society that sees them as economically valuable, that says, hey, yeah, and when you're ready to come back into the labor market, we'll see that as work. We'll see that as paid work. We'll see that as valuable work. That isn't happening. And the cost of that is that unexpected things can happen in our lives. Marriages can break down, people can die, divorces can happen, separations can happen, and women are in a position where it can be very difficult to make up that lost earning for the economies of scale. So, what do you think about this? How does it look for you? We'd love to hear a little bit more. Just something to note is that we are so lucky and grateful that this series is being supported by the Melbourne Public Humanities Initiative at the University of Melbourne. Thank you for listening to us. Thanks to all your likes, your subscribes, your follows. We are getting some money to support this. Thank you, the Melbourne Public Humanities Initiative. We are so eternally grateful. If you like this episode, if you have comments about this episode, if you hate this episode, tell us. Give us some comments on our Misperceived podcast or at Prof. Leah on Instagram. And also, thank you so much for listening. Have a wonderful week. Mwah. This podcast was produced with the support of the incredible Sophie Squires, the wonderful Kate Danger, the fantastic Rich Berner, and the one and only, the best ever made, Serena Reagan. I would like to acknowledge that our podcast is recorded on the lands of the Wurundjeri Woi-wurrung people of the Kulin Nation, and pay my respects to their elders past and present. I extend that respect to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people listening today.